I'm, I'm Kevin Caldwell, the Southeast Legislative Manager for the Marijuana Policy Project, and thank you for joining us today. During the press conference today, you may enter questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom, and please include what media outlet you represent, and the questions will be answered at the end. Today's press conference is to recognize the 50th anniversary of the release of the Shafer Commission report and to inform you of the release of Marijuana Policies Project that amplifies the message of the Shafer Commission concluded from their report. Our report can be found at mpp.org/decrim. In 1972, the Shafer Commission issued a report that called for the decriminalization of cannabis at the state and federal level. The report stated that neither the marijuana user nor the drug itself constitutes a danger to public safety and recommended removing the penalties for possessing an ounce or less of cannabis. However, it was buried by the Nixon administration. Texas and the nation have suffered the consequences of that action for half a century. Still, 50 years later, still 50 years later, hundreds of thousands of Americans are being arrested every year for simple cannabis possession. There are 19 states, as well as the federal government, that have not yet implemented the recommendations of the commission, where an individual could land in jail for simple possession of cannabis. In 2019, more people were arrested for cannabis than all violent crimes combined. Several of these states have extremely harsh penalties for cannabis possession, including states where the second offense is a felony, which includes the state of Texas. Possessing a couple ounces or less of cannabis in Texas carries a maximum penalty of 180 days imprisonment and a $2,000 fine. In the second most populous state in the country, 75% of law enforcement agencies reported making more than 43,000 arrests for cannabis possession in 2019, while only 42% of violent crimes, 16% of property crimes, and 29% of rapes were cleared. In an era of scarce allocation of law enforcement resources, is enforcing prohibition the best use of taxpayer dollars? Decriminalizing or legalizing cannabis will free up police time for crimes with victims. And experts at Washington State University found that police solve significantly more violent and property crimes after passage of legalization in Colorado and Washington State. We also need to look at the nature of enforcement in Texas. Black individuals are 2.6 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis than white individuals. These numbers are truly shocking when data consistently shows that Black individuals use cannabis at roughly the same rate as their white counterparts. The inequitable enforcement leads to a distrust in law enforcement. Decriminalization is a logical step in making our communities a more just place to live and raise families. There has been some decriminalization on the local level, with Austin City Council passing a resolution that limits enforcement for low-level cannabis offenses. And at least 10 other counties have adopted different policies, including issuing of summons and release policies instead of custodial arrests. Those include Bexar County, which includes San Antonio, Harris County, which includes the city of Houston, Hayes County, Williamson, Nueces County, El Paso, and the city of Cedar Park. But even in these localities, punishments under state law that include jail time can still be used at court hearings. The commission recommended that the possession of cannabis for personal use should no longer be an offense. And the long-term consequences of an arrest for cannabis possession often haunt a person for the rest of their lives. The scarlet letter of an arrest record can cost individuals a professional license, the ability to get employment, housing, and too often the financial burdens of diversion programs make them an option only for the better off in our community. All these life-altering consequences for possessing a plant that half of all Americans have used, including presidents and Supreme Court justices. Gallup polling shows that 68% of Americans agree that cannabis should be legal, and 69% of Texans support cannabis legalization. Today, in 31 states in the District of Columbia, those states have implemented the recommendations of the commission and have enacted laws that prevent the jailing of residents for possession of small amounts of cannabis. In 18 of those states, cannabis is legal for adults 21 and older, while the other 13 states have decriminalized simple possession. And now that 31 states have decriminalized cannabis, there's data to show how this affects teen use. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration has conducted polls on teens since the 1970s. They have not seen a rise in teen use after decriminalization. In fact, Mississippi decriminalized cannabis possession in the 70s, while Alabama has some of the most draconian penalties in the country, and yet their teen usage is almost equal. In states that have reformed the laws to stop arresting and jailing individuals for simple cannabis possession, thousands have been saved from being placed in the criminal justice system. Now it is time for Texans to enact legislation that will end the human suffering that criminalization brings upon our communities. It is up to us to demand that from our legislature. And with that, I'd like to introduce the first member of our panel today, the founder of Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition, Ms. Ann Lee. Thank you for joining us, ma'am.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here because this is something in which I believe with such passion that I'm delighted to be here. It is, as a conservative, we have to recognize that prohibition is anything but conservative. Prohibition is, the cost of it is astronomical. It does no good. In fact, it makes it easier for kids to get cannabis than if we had. So there's so many reasons to not support marijuana prohibition. As I said, my late husband and I founded RAMP, Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition, because being as true conservatives, we realize that prohibition is simply not conservative. Pardon?
Lieutenant Governor.
Ma'am, thank you for that.
Also, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who considers himself a conservative, and yet he is blocking penalty reductions.
Thank you,
And
Ms. Ann.
I've had a lot of respect for Dan, have known him for a long time, but I'm very disappointed in his stand on this issue.
Well, thank you for joining us today, ma'am. And I recognize that I did not properly announce myself. And my name is Kevin Caldwell, and I'm the Southeast Legislative Manager for Marijuana Policy Project. The next panel member I'd like to introduce is Ms. Laurie Zapinski. Ms. Zapinski.
Hi. So my name is Laurie Zapinski, and I am a member of the Texas Normal Board of Directors. In 2003, I was arrested for 3 grams of cannabis in my purse, and it was a pretty traumatic experience. I was taken to jail, released the next day, had to do several court appearances. I had my driver's license suspended. I had DPS fines I had to pay. I also had to retain an SR-22 in addition to my car insurance in order to get my driver's license back, and had to maintain that for several years. I do have a Class B misdemeanor possession charge on my record, which I'm required to disclose if I am ever looking for a job. I'm a homeowner. I pay taxes. I vote. I work in technology, and I am a productive member of society. I do qualify for the Teacup program in Texas. However, it is very cost prohibitive and doesn't provide a whole cannabis solution, which my conditions, being PTSD and diabetic neuropathy, do require. So I would urge everyone to support changing the laws here in Texas and decriminalizing cannabis and creating a true helpful medical program that is affordable to everybody.
Thank you very much for sharing your experiences with the Texas criminal justice system. And I think that's a great segue into our next panelist, Representative Joe Moody, who has been a a fighter for decriminalization in the great state of Texas for many, many years. Representative Moody?
Great, thank you, and I appreciate you inviting me and having me. What this report makes clear is that change is long overdue. Fortunately, I've never been more hopeful for smarter cannabis laws in Texas than I am right now. The wait has been certainly agonizing for those who've dealt with senseless consequences in our criminal justice system, but we still have come very far, very fast. When I started talking about decriminalization only a handful of sessions ago, I honestly, I couldn't even get a committee hearing. Yet we passed decriminalization off of the Texas House floor with a supermajority vote last session. And we're going to see that that bill will work its way through the Senate in time as well. And so I think that things are rapidly shifting for the better. I will say that decriminalization is separate from medical and separate from retail, but we know that perceptions are linked. So progress in one area helps pave the way for progress across the board. We've seen the compassionate use program has been an important start that's shown doubters that the sky isn't falling. We've also had more traction on retail than ever before, and the expansion of CBD, hemp, and Delta-8 sales has helped challenge the idea that cannabis is something that should be criminal. This report highlights an increasingly widespread awareness of how harsh our laws are and how little we get for our investment. These days, when I talk to legislators about this topic, they're no longer making stoner jokes. They're expressing genuine concern over the direction of cannabis policy in Texas, and that's an important change. That's why I'm looking forward to continuing the work on decriminalization this session. We know the House is well prepared to pass it, and I can tell you I've had very productive conversations with the governor's office on what his parameters are. And that means we just need to get it through the Senate and onto his desk for signature. And that's where I'm going to focus my energy this coming session. I know I'm not alone in that fight, and I am quite humbled by the broad bipartisan support this issue has received. Together, working together, we'll bring Texas into the majority of states that have chosen decriminalization.
Thank you, Representative Moody, and thank you for your leadership on this. And we all look forward to helping you achieve those goals as we continue to move forward. The last panelist today is Mr. Bryan Rose. And sir, I will let you introduce yourself and your organization you represent today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bryan Rose. I'm a former police officer in the city of Irving, Texas. I represent the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, LEAP, and I wanted to be here today to talk to you to give our support in decriminalization of cannabis. It is a long time coming. In 1972, it's 50 years ago, the Shafer report, and I just wanted to cite real quick that the conclusion of saying that the actual and potential harm of the use of this drug is not great enough to justify intrusion by the criminal law into private behavior, which to dovetail in Ms. Lee's statement as a conservative, intrusion into private life is something that should be for something that's important. And as a police officer, our resources are limited, time and money, and public safety should not be squandered on a victimless crime such as marijuana possession. And it's not a hypothetical anymore. When they wrote that in 1972, marijuana was criminalized across the country in every state. And now, as Mr. Caldwell reported, Colorado is proof, Washington's proof. It's not hypothetical. Police solve more violent crime and property crimes when they're not having to police marijuana use. Every time you arrest somebody, you are taking their freedom away, and that should be reserved for criminals that affect violence against people or take property. And when you have contact with people as a police officer, you lose trust enforcing laws that aren't that are victimless. If people, and then once you lose the trust, if people don't trust you as a police officer, when you interact with them, they won't talk to you. So if they're scared about the small amount of marijuana they have in their pocket, they're not going to report a crime that may be committed. They will not admit to being a witness if they have a small amount of marijuana in their pockets. And that's just too important of a resource for police officers to lose because of marijuana. And finally, and the last point is the disparity enforcement is just too big of a problem. 2.6 times as many Black people are arrested in Texas than whites when the usage is similar amongst the populations. And the effect on the Black community and low-income people of Texas, the Black Texans and low-income Texans of being arrested for marijuana is too great. Again, this is a victimless crime. And finally, as a police officer on the street, I never once came across somebody who was high on marijuana that was violent or that would not listen to command. There are other substances that are far more harmful and other situations that should be the focus of an officer's attention other than marijuana. So we support the decriminalization in Texas.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for all of our panelists. Once again, I'd like to let you know that the report that was released today is available at mpp.org/decrim. And it is titled Behind the Times, the 19 states where one joint will land you in jail.